Good evening. I'm David Reed, Executive Director of Yuba-Sutter Arts and Culture. I'm here today to kick off the annual Day of Remembrance celebration. Of course, we're virtual this year. Usually we'd be hosting at Yuba College or at the Sutter County Museum. We've got a great lineup for you of interviews and conversations with community leaders, community members, some historic video clips for you to see. And we'll wrap up the program with a virtual tour of the Arboga Assembly Center Memorial Site and Interpretive Center, which has just been completed. This is a project we undertook this last year with some grant funding from the State Library. We've collaborated with the Marysville Japanese American Citizens League, and we're very excited to show you this tremendous new historic asset in Yuba County. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. We'll see you at the end.
Hello, my name is Walter Masuda, and I'm a former Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Education at Yuba College and a former professor of English. I am the current treasurer of the Marysville chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. You know, as I reflect on what the Day of Remembrance means to me, four important things come to my mind. First, the importance of personal narratives as historical evidence, and then the necessity for education, the fragility of the democratic process itself, and finally, the need to ensure that we learn the right lessons from this historical event. So for those who may not know, the Day of Remembrance refers to February 19th, 1942, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which resulted in the forced relocation and incarceration of 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry who were living on the West Coast. The assumption was that these individuals posed a threat to American security, and yet none of these Americans were ever found guilty of espionage or sabotage against the United States. Their only crimes, if you can call them that, were having Japanese ancestry and physically looking like the enemy with which we were at war. This is why I think the personal narratives of those who actually experienced the incarceration are so important to preserve and learn from. Sadly, most of these Americans have now passed away. My own mother, who was incarcerated at Post in Arizona, would have been 98 today. And my father, who served as a medic in the U.S. Army's 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which was the most highly decorated RCT in Army history, would have been 102. If he hadn't volunteered to fight for his country, he would have been incarcerated along with the rest of his family at Topaz, Utah. And, you know, I know that sharing these experiences about the incarceration was something that some of my parents' generation found hard to do. My own parents were very open about their experiences on the front lines and in the camps. I learned a great deal about this period of history from their firsthand accounts of the hardships they faced and eventually overcame. I recently donated much of their memorabilia to the Sutter County Museum on Butte House Road in Yuba City, where I hope it will be used as part of an educational display. And this brings me to my second point. I think the Day of Remembrance is important to observe because it serves an important educative function for those who may not know much about the Japanese American incarceration. When I was going to school, I never learned anything about the Japanese American incarceration in any of my history classes. I remember that in the 8th grade, I did learn a little bit about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, less about Hitler's invasion of Europe, and absolutely nothing about the Jewish Holocaust or the Japanese American incarceration. Whatever I know about those events came from accounts that my parents shared with me. When I asked my own students a couple of years ago whether they had heard about the Japanese American incarceration, only one student out of 30 raised her hand, saying that she knew about it only because her high school English teacher had assigned Farewell to Manzanar, a biography about the personal experiences of Japanese Americans just before and after the Second World War. So clearly, Japanese American incarceration is still a topic that is not always covered in schools. And this is why I encourage all those who visit this virtual observation of the Day of Remembrance to learn more about the incarceration. I also recommend that you visit the Arboga Assembly Center Memorial Site just south of Marysville. This site is mentioned in more detail by other speakers in this virtual presentation, and it's worth a visit. In the past, the Sutter County Museum and Yuba College have, in the month of February, hosted Day of Remembrance displays on the effect that Executive Order 9066 had on the citizens of this very area. Obviously, because of COVID-19, these displays have been temporarily suspended and this virtual display set up in their place. My hope is that in the future, community members will once again be able to visit those physical displays in person. And my third reason for why I think it's important to observe the Day of Remembrance has to do with the personal freedoms that are supposed to be guaranteed by the document that we as Americans hold so dear, the Constitution and its amendments. In times of personal strife, we have seen time and time again just how fragile human rights can be and how vulnerable our democracy is in the face of very undemocratic forces. Finally, I think it's crucial that everyone know about the incarceration of Japanese Americans so that they learn the right lessons from this historical event. I never, ever want this event to be used wrongly to justify registries of any kind or profiling that discriminates against our people on the basis of religion, culture, ethnicity, or race. When we understand the facts of the Japanese American incarceration, we know that similar actions must never be repeated against other groups of people. By remembering the hardships of those who endured the Japanese American incarceration, we are reaffirming our belief in the importance of civil liberties and the need to protect them always. It is in this spirit that I invite you to learn more about the Japanese American incarceration by visiting this virtual site. Please enjoy it and please learn from it.
Good afternoon. My name is Lon Hatamiya. I'm proudly both a third-generation Japanese American and third-generation native of Yuba County, where my grandfather started farming over 100 years ago. I want to truly thank David Reed with Yuba-Sutter Arts for inviting me to say a few words at today's event. February 19th is significant as a day of remembrance, not only for the Japanese American community, but for the entire nation. This date marks the day in 1942 that President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which condemned nearly 120,000 innocent Americans of Japanese ancestry to be incarcerated in internment camps without due process. My entire family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and my mom and dad were among those interned, uprooted from their homes, farms, and businesses across not only the Yuba-Sutter area, but the entire West Coast. Most importantly, it is a day of remembrance because it reminds us each year of the fragile nature of our democracy and the importance of equal justice and liberty for all Americans. My family's internment instilled in me a commitment to public service and inspired me to ensure that it would never happen again. Today also highlights the completion of the Arboga Assembly Center Memorial Park and Interpretive Center, the site of a temporary assembly location where in 1942, 2,500 Japanese Americans were imprisoned prior to being sent to permanent internment camps across the country. I want to thank Yuba-Sutter Arts and the Marysville JACL for their tireless efforts in planning and obtaining the funds to complete this historical project. I also want to thank my friend, Marysville City Council member Stuart Gilchrist, for his amazing design and steadfast commitment, and to Dan Turner for the wonderfully welded interpretation of barracks-shaped sculptures. Lastly, today is also a day of remembrance in honor of the sacrifices and contributions that Japanese Americans have made to our local community, state, and nation. From war heroes, military leaders, members of Congress, scientists, educators, farmers, and even cabinet members in California, Japanese Americans have continually made a positive impact. Thank you, and please stay safe and well during this pandemic.
Hello, this is Congressman John Garamendi with a very special greeting to the Yuba-Sutter Arts and Cultural Association. What you're doing this year is extremely important, reminding all of us that our civil liberties are only guaranteed by our intense immediate and continued attention to the civil liberties. The Japanese American community, in your communities, in Sutter and Yuba, you understand what it's all about. You lost your civil liberties. It was World War II, and certainly there was a lot to be worried about, but not about the patriotism of Japanese Americans. Nevertheless, an executive order, 9066, took away the civil liberties of the Japanese Americans and herded them into concentration camps. We can never let this happen again. And so we must always remember, we must be reminded, because in remembering, we are once again called to the attention of today and tomorrow. Civil liberties must always be on our mind, and we must never let another incident like occurred to the Japanese Americans in Marysville, in Yuba County, and in Sutter County and beyond, even in my hometown of Walnut Grove. We must always remember what happened and then commit ourselves to never allowing it to happen again. Protect our civil liberties. Remind each other of what happened, and always look to the future and guard carefully our civil liberties. Wish you well. Sorry I can't be with you, but in the age of COVID, we are where we are. But this too will pass. Thank you so very much for the chance to greet you.
Hello, this is Jessica Haugen, Director-Curator of the Sutter County Museum. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this program. My presentation might seem a little unusual, but you don't need me to tell you about Executive Order 9066 and its consequences. Many of you lived it or had family members who did. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you why history is relevant, and particularly why inclusive history is important. In 2013, a group of history professionals formed a group called the History Relevance Campaign to explore this very issue. After years of work, they released a statement titled The Value of History. As the statement is fairly lengthy, I won't share it in its entirety, but a few points that really hit home with me are: history nurtures personal and collective identity in a diverse world. People discover their place in time through stories of their families, communities, and nation. These stories of freedom and equality, injustice and struggle, loss and achievement, and courage and triumph shape people's personal values that guide them through life. History is the foundation for strong, vibrant communities. A place becomes a community when wrapped in human memory as told through family stories, tribal traditions, and civic commemorations, as well as discussions about our roles and responsibilities to each other and the places we call home. History, saved and preserved, is the foundation for future generations. Historical knowledge is crucial to protecting democracy. By preserving authentic and meaningful documents, artifacts, images, stories, and places, future generations have a foundation on which to build and know what it means to be a member of the civic community. A word implied in all these statements is empathy. I would argue that history is important because it helps to teach empathy. Historical empathy helps people connect with the past, but also helps them to better understand how the past has shaped the present. As empathy can be a very powerful tool for action, this understanding of the past can help to shape that action for societal good. On May 31st, 2020, Secretary of the Smithsonian, Lonnie G. Bunch, released a statement on the killing of George Floyd a few days before. In it, he says, although it will be a monumental task, the past is replete with examples of ordinary people working together to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. History is a guide to a better future and demonstrates that we can become a better society, but only if we collectively demand it from each other and from the institutions responsible for administering justice. David Inouye, Executive Director of the Japanese American Citizens League, also released a statement. In it, he ties together the colonization of Native American land, the enslavement of African peoples, and the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II as the history of oppression in this country, and calls for citizens to stand together to demand change. In order to change, we must understand how things came to be the way they are. We must know our history, and we must feel empathy for what others have gone through. My predecessor at the Sutter County Museum, Julie Stark, felt that the museum was missing a large part of the story of our community. She lobbied county leadership to build a new multicultural wing for the museum and reached out to various local communities to involve them in telling their stories in the museum. The end result is what I have been touring you throughout this talk. We have exhibits on the Mexican Americans, Chinese Americans, Punjabi Americans, Japanese Americans, and Hmong Americans who live in Yuba-Sutter. We are researching to add an African American exhibit, a project that has unfortunately been slowed down by the pandemic. We also recently completed a new exhibit on the Nisenan, the Native Americans who are from our area. In these exhibits, we don't shy away from the difficult stories. In fact, the difficult stories are often the ones that have the most impact on our visitors.
My brother and I were in the front living room looking out the front window, and I saw two soldiers come marching up our driveway. Their rifles had bayonets on them, flashing in the sun. They stomped at the front porch and banged on the door. My father answered it, and we were ordered out of our home at gunpoint. And my brother and I and my father were out on the lawn, and my mother was the last to come out, and she was carrying the baby in one arm and a duffel bag, a huge duffel bag in the other, and she had tears rolling down her cheek. It was a memory that I can never erase, to see your mother crying, and as we were being ordered out of our home. And we were taken from there to the horse stables of San Anita Racetrack. The camps hadn't been built yet, and so we were temporarily housed in a horse stall. For my parents, it was the most degrading, humiliating experience that they ever had.
In New York, Japanese Americans took part in a silent solidarity march to commemorate February 19, 1942, as a day of remembrance, the day President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, signed the Executive Order 9066 to relocate approximately 120,000 Japanese civilians into incarceration camps in the name of national security during World War II. Karen Lee came up with the idea of the peaceful march in 2017.
And of course, with the new administration's incarceration and separation of families, I thought it was important to make people aware of how that affected people in the past and how it's prescient today.
Dressed in period clothing, marchers walked 7 blocks from Penn Station at West 32nd Street to the Japanese American United Church, where they held a Day of Remembrance service, which included a candle lighting ceremony and the naming of the incarceration camps. One of the guest speakers at the service, Afaf Nasher of Council on American Islamic Relations, represented the Muslim community, which continues to be banned under the Trump administration. She was there to support the Day of Remembrance movement.
A little over a year ago,
Tak Forimoto was born in a Japanese incarceration camp in Tule Lake, California. His family was given just 10 days' notice and allowed only one suitcase when they had to leave their home. He spoke out against the incarceration for the current immigrant community.
Have the politicians who pass these, they rubber stamp them, and then create havoc to any other American citizens. It's terrible, and we should be able to recognize this.
Two significant things happened in the state of California. Governor Gavin Newsom declared February 19th as a day of remembrance to never forget when Japanese Americans were detained. Then on February 20, the very following day, California formally apologized for the incarceration without due process and discrimination to the Japanese Americans. That's 78 years since FDR's signing of the Executive Order 9066. Theodora Yoshikama, known as Teddy, was born in Tule Lake. She shares about her experience at the camp and why it's so important to not repeat history.
We were being incarcerated. Nobody stood up for us at the time. Everyone was too scared. We couldn't even be Japanese. We never learned our language either because we were supposed to be more American. Now, we need to really support the Muslim and Arab communities and children and families at the border. We have to really stop this happening again. We must do this.
We're here today with Carolyn Sasaki. She's a teacher for the visually impaired, part of the Yuba County Office of Education. Hi, Carolyn. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're pleased to see you out here on this beautiful day, and we want to get to know you a little bit. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, Southern California, in a little town called Monterey Park.
What's your educational background? You're obviously a teacher now, but I think you've done a few other things along the way.
Yeah, well, my goal was to be a veterinarian, and so I went to UC Davis, graduated, and ended up going to law school instead. Spent 18 years in law, and currently I am a teacher for the visually impaired.
Did you have to go back for additional training in that teacher role?
I did. I went to Chico State and got a degree teaching the moderate to severe population, special education, and then I went to San Francisco State to get my credential teaching the visually impaired.
Incredible. What brought you up here? Was it that school experience at Davis and Chico? Is that
correct? Davis, and I really love Northern California, and I love this community, and so stayed.
So Carolyn, as you know, this interview is part of our virtual Day of Remembrance program this year. Obviously, we can't meet in person, and typically we've worked with the Japanese American Citizens League. We've hosted these events at the Sutter County Museum and at Yuba College. But we want to hear from you, your experience growing up. Clearly, you were young and not in the camps. But what about your family? What did you hear about that experience growing up as a young woman in Southern California?
Well, both sides, my parents, my mother and father, and their families were both sent to the camps. My mom was around 8, my dad was around 10. My mother was sent to the Wyoming camp, Heart Mountain, and my dad was at Poston in Arizona. My mother's recollection is that they were taken to Santa Anita Racetrack, and that's where they were housed temporarily until they were taken by train to Heart Mountain. She said they could see out of the windows the majority of the time, although when they traveled through towns, they were asked to pull the shades. Her family, they were farmers down in Southern California. He had some acreage, but he lost it all after, my grandfather lost it all after they were released. And apparently someone from the camp told them to go to Idaho. So they ended up settling in Idaho for a short period of time. And I just know my mom didn't like that at all. They were raising potatoes and farming the land there. Eventually they ended up back in Southern California, and he purchased a 10-acre strawberry farm. So he grew berries and blackberries and strawberries. And I do remember working on that farm with them there.
What was it? Is it something you heard about often growing up, or just occasionally? Was it an everyday thing, or how present was it in your life?
It was not present at all. I personally believe my mom tried to erase that portion of her life from letting us know about it or talking about it. I think her generation did a lot of assimilation, where they both lost the Japanese language growing up. They eliminated that once they entered school, both parents. And they did everything they could to fit in with their community, so as not to be singled out.
We've heard that from other families and individuals as well. And, so you grew up with really a large extended family as well, it sounds like. Grandparents, parents.
Yes. Both sides, and we were all very close in proximity to one another. I think that Japanese people don't tend to move away, and they stay close. And there is, even though there was the assimilation as I spoke of, there is still a close-knit community amongst the Japanese. It's amazing that my parents are able to, I can mention a name and they're able to say, oh, I know that family, or I do you remember that guy? He was, he went to high school with us, or something. I mean, they can pull names out of the hat that none of us, I don't think, are able to do nowadays.
What about your dad and his family's experience and how they got to the camp?
So my grandfather owned a tofu business in Los Angeles, and he worked out of a Chinese grocery store, and that's how he would make and deliver the tofu. And he was fortunate in that when they were sent to camp, he deeded the house to the grocery store owners. So when they actually came back, they had a house to go to. Really tiny 900 square foot home, and they had 7 families in there temporarily until everyone else could find places to live within the community. So he was very fortunate, and he was able to pick up his business right after coming back. It was a different story than my mother's.
So Carolyn, have you visited any of the internment camps as an adult?
A few years back, I did go to Manzanar. Henry Fukuhara was an artist, watercolor artist, who was housed there during the war, and one of his students put on a watercolor seminar. So we painted the mountains, and we painted the camp, and we were able to visit the museum.
What an amazing experience. So growing up, and then as an adult, tell us what impact has that had on your life, hearing about those stories from your family, close family members?
We didn't get to hear a lot of stories. We had to kind of pull it out of our family. They didn't want to share a lot, I don't feel. And what I would like is a little bit more of the personal stories, a little bit something that I could take with me and understand a little bit more about what life was like for the people in the camps. And I know we could talk about it on an academic basis, and we can think about what had happened, but I do think that it has repercussions in current civil issues that are going on, and whether or not we should be separating people by color or by race or religion. And I think it's an issue that carries forward to today.
No question, there's still a lot of work we need to do in the arena of civil liberties, as you point out. So, Carolyn Sasaki, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing these stories.
Thank you.
Photographs paint a painful picture in American history. A journey that wasn't chosen, but forced. Lives changed forever 75 years ago when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order authorizing the imprisonment of Japanese Americans, with these instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry.
It seemed like that's what we did all the time. Hurry up and wait.
Masatano and his family were forced to leave their home in Loomis to move to an internment camp when he was just 13 years old.
It was something that happened that shouldn't have happened.
Now 88 years old, Hatano's story is being told through these photos and artifacts at Sacramento's Crocker Art Museum. Hatano says it really wasn't that bad.
You know, people think it's strange when I tell them I didn't think it was that bad. And then I would explain to them that before the orders to evacuate came, we lived through the Depression.
And at the camp, Hatano and the other kids didn't have to work anymore when they weren't in school.
Didn't have any more work to do. That was nice. We play day every day. It's kind of like an adventure for us little kids. And it's a different story when you talk to the adults, like my parents, all the parents. They've been here for 20, 30 years, you know, working hard to get ahead, provide for their children, and all of a sudden, they're uprooted.
Different views from different generations are on display at this exhibit called Two Views, photographs by Ansel Adams and Leonard Frank, documenting life inside camps located here in California and in Canada. Organizers say it gives people the opportunity to see both the resilience and the hardship experienced by those who were incarcerated. And the Crocker's curator says the ceramics, Tiffany lamps, and paintings show the cross-pollination between Japanese and American artists.
A lot of the objects in the show are just stunning, and you know, sometimes it's because of the influence of one culture on another that some of the best ideas happen.
Hello, my name is Haruko Arendt. I'm a member of the Marysville chapter JACL. I was born and raised in Japan, after the war. When I moved to Yuba-Sutter area, I had the opportunity to meet lots of Japanese Americans. When I continued learning Ikebana, one of my teachers told me about the internment camps. While she was in camp, she was taught Ikebana by a teacher from Japan. Flower arrangement is lifelong achievement, just like any other profession. It is my pleasure to give this presentation to honor those people who were inspired to make flower arrangement in camp. Ikebana means living flower arrangement. More than 550 years ago, a Buddhist priest making an arrangement by a pond was the creator of Ikebana. He placed his arrangement on the temple altar to honor the deceased. There are many Ikebana schools and many styles. A flower arrangement is your spiritual work, expression from your inside of you. To make arrangements for different occasions, you traditionally use a flower of seasons. Not like today's where you can find flowers from all over the world year-round. People in the camp did not have a wide variety of material to choose from. How you can cut and treat material is very important so that it may last longer and stay beautiful. Today, I would like to demonstrate Ikenobo freestyle. The basic of a freestyle composition, you need Ikebana scissor or garden clippers. A container, any container, empty jars, example basket, and your imagination. 4 elements, the natural beauty of a plant. The 4 elements are line material, surface, points, mass, lines. After you choose your elements, go to the next step. The basic forms of composition. Imagine what forms you are going to use. Vertical forms suggest upwards and downwards movement. Slanting forms suggest both upwards and downwards slanting. I'm going to demonstrate straight forms. Use a fastidio. When you cut it, just the height is, you don't make more than your base height. Well, actually, excuse me, 2.5 times your base size. When you make arrangement, you don't want to make a flat blocks. You make a dimension, area, give space. And slanting forms. is a finished arrangement. The surface, mass, the points, use camellia, and this is a little accent also. This is my finished arrangement for the freestyle, and I would like to thank Art Council, Abby Sassina, and David Reed for giving me an opportunity to introduce Ikebana. Thank you.
I remember as a very young boy looking up at Castle Rock from behind barbed wire fences. I, as a child, was imprisoned here, but my parents were the ones that really suffered. Tule Lake is the most symbolically important camp. It was the largest of all the camps, and it was the cruelest. After a year of imprisonment, the government came down with a loyalty questionnaire. Outrageous, irrational, very stupid questions. The most controversial question was question 28. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? For the government to assume that we have a racial, inborn genetic loyalty to the Emperor was outrageous. We're Americans. Because they answered no to that question, we were sent here to what they call the segregation camp. That really was so grotesquely un-American.
My father was arrested and placed in the jail. Men held in this jail were beaten and tortured.
The government was looking at how to legalize the deportation of American citizens that they didn't like. When you think about it as an immigration story of getting rid of dissidents, it is a shocking story.
We nowadays witness the resurgence of the same bigotry, prejudice, and racism in many parts of the world, including, if I may, here in the United States.
We can be a terrible government if the people do not really understand what our democracy stands for. We can have the horror and the tragedy of something like Tule Lake.
So let's go back to where so you're picked up, and where did they take you initially?
What was this?
So when you had to leave the area, where did they take you initially? From Gridley, where did you go?
We got on the train. A couple of days later, we were in Tule Lake. We didn't go to no assembly center. We went from Gridley to concentration camp. That was it. Yeah.
And yeah, because you said sort of July, so that's a lot later than, like up in the Northwest, I know people were leaving as early as March.
We were probably, by the time we got up there, I think Marysville came in one day later than we did. So I think they might have been the last people to evacuate. We were darn close to the end. Maybe we were next to last. So it was just we didn't go to any assembly center or anything. We went from where you lived to the Tule Lake.
And in terms of timing, was there, it's interesting how you had to leave like a week before you would start to harvest. During that time, the months before, was there a sense that you would be able to harvest your crop?
Well, if we knew that we was going to have to leave before we harvest, we would have probably made a deal with somebody else to lease the land to somebody else. But we figured that we was going to be able to harvest our crop before we had to leave. We knew we had to leave, but it was just a matter of when.
And do you think you maybe were misled about that? Is that?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just wishful thinking that we're going to still be around until the crop's harvested.
We're here with Stuart Gilchrist. Stuart's an artist, designer, Marysville City Councilman. Stuart created the original concept of the Arboga Assembly Center, Memorial Site, Interpretive Center. Had this vision, and we want to talk to him today about his inspiration. Hi, Stuart.
Hi. It's good to be here. Good to see you.
We started talking about this project, probably almost 2 years ago, and we sort of laid it out for you, and the next thing you know, you're sketching and doing that magic that you do. And talk about what went into your process and coming up with this magnificent design for this park.
So we drove out to see the site for the first time, and it's on, Broadway Boulevard, which I would every day for 6 years, the school bus, took me down Broadway to take me to Cummings Ranch. So of course, after Tina Linville and myself traveled out to the location and listening to all of the ideas, I could picture in my head what that looked like from the images that I extracted from online of the barracks and the barbed wire fencing. And so when we pulled up to the former Lupita Escalante homestead, the first thing I noticed was the typical jagged fencing that is all over Arboga and any countryside. And I fell in love with it. And that was my first inspiration, was to keep the old wooden fencing with the random barbed wire. You could tell a farmer fixed the barbed wire and it wasn't level, and it actually looked sinister and magnificent. Once the visitor makes their way through the sinister barbed wire fencing, we come upon the barracks, and I wanted corten steel metal, cold, severe, in juxtaposition to the wooden barracks that used to be there. I think they were tar paper with wood. And I wanted a rigid, cold series of buildings that represented the many barracks that were out there that housed I don't know how many people. But the most important thing was the barracks needed to say something. And my feeling about the laser cut designs within the barracks, I wanted to make a statement. I wanted us to realize that these people we put into the assembly center were actually locals. They were from this area. The first thing they saw in the morning was the Sutter Buttes, like all of us. And so the first barracks has a laser cut, a great job, by the way, laser cut image of the Sutter Buttes. The second image they see is that they were Californians. We're in California. So the second barracks has the state of California cut out, laser cut. And then the third one is they were American, and so the United States is the third laser cut image in the steel barracks to represent who these people really were. And so that was my inspiration. So I was very, very excited to be a part of this project and to see it come together so beautifully. It's very exciting. It looks like it's been there because of the fencing, and you're not quite sure what's going on. And then you realize what's happening, and I think that's the best way to let people know what was really going on in our own backyards.
The other side of these sculptures, and Dan, take us through this part of it.
Well, if you look at this right here, at first we have the Buttes, then we moved to California, and then we moved to America. Part of this memorial sculpture is to remember the atrocities that we have perpetrated in the past. Part of history is kind of like a Clint Eastwood movie. You have to take the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you have to, if you don't remember and you don't recognize that that we have done some horrific activities in our past, we aren't going to learn from it, and then we'll more easily slide back into a mindset of where that's okay. And if we stop teaching about it, if we stop remembering it, then that's a part of history that can be lost. And so with these memorials, hopefully it'll bring to the forefront of memory, to the mindset, to provoke action of remembering the civil rights of people that we have trampled on in the past. And that's part of our history as Americans. And to be part of something like this big, this momentous, was a blessing. It's just something I'm very intrigued with, of just remembering, just the memories.
Very well said. And to paraphrase, we really need to own that history. And these structures are the centerpiece of the memorial site, which is about 200 square feet out here on this piece of land in Arboga, south of Marysville, which is the property is actually owned by the Marysville Joint Unified School District, who graciously entered into a memo of understanding with us for the use of this land until they need it to build a school, which will be a while.
And these are actually proportional to the barracks that were actually on site. So we took the ends of the barracks and actually modeled these after the end of the barracks. And if you look at them, this is an interactive display. When you touch them, you'll see the handprints over time come out. And so we want this to be a personal experience, a personalized walkthrough, so to speak.
These are, well, hopefully it'll be profound when folks come out here and they'll follow the trail out and around the barracks. Sculptures, they'll see murals that we'll be adding here in the next couple of weeks. The murals will have QR codes on them, which will access videos of internment camp survivors. And it should be a pretty profound experience. If you come out here and you don't know anything about what happened to Japanese Americans in the U.S. during World War II, you'll be a minor expert after you come out here and experience this location.
Thank you.
Dan, thanks to you and the whole team at Yuba College for all your support for this beautiful project.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
We're at the Arboga Assembly Center Memorial Site and Interpretive Center, just completed by Yuba-Sutter Arts and Culture in collaboration with the Japanese American Citizens League of Marysville. This project has been in the works for many years, and we're pleased to be able to give you the kind of a first look here today. So come on along and we'll show you what's out here. It was about 10 years ago that this location was designated a historic landmark by the state of California. The plaque was created, the boulder was cut out to accommodate the plaque, and it's been patiently sitting and waiting in the parking lot of the Buddhist Church in Marysville for its final placement out here as the Interpretive Center was created. The design for the park was created by Stuart Gilchrist, local artist, designer, and Marysville City Councilman. He came up with the idea of these large steel silhouette sculptures which mock or at least give the impression of the barracks that were here, where 2,500 Japanese Americans were housed temporarily in 1942 while the federal government was creating the more permanent concentration camps. The silhouettes were created by Dan Turner, who's head of the welding department at Yuba College, along with support from his students. And they've become kind of the centerpiece of this site. We added murals to the park in order to convey additional information along with graphics and photographs relevant to the experience. Each mural also includes a QR code so that when you visit the site you can use your smartphone just on the camera setting and hold it up next to the QR code, and a video will appear, mostly interviews with internment camp survivors. The silhouette sculptures simulating the outline of the barracks where the Japanese Americans were held are just such a dramatic centerpiece for this park. And now that they're actually here and in place, it's just remarkable, and it kind of conveys a sense of that oppressive atmosphere that these folks lived under for a number of years. Well, that concludes our program. I hope you've enjoyed this year's virtual Day of Remembrance commemoration. It's an important part of our history, one that we all need to be sure we don't forget. We've got a lot of work still to do in the area of civil liberties, and this is just a great life lesson for us all. Do visit the Arboga Assembly Center when you can, easy to get to, well worth your time looking at what happened there, learning about that experience right here in our community. So thanks so much, stay well, and we'll see you next year.